Honourable Member for Clark, and Leader of the Greens.
Thank you.
Don't forget that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Premier and Minister for Climate Change.
Saved yourself good telling.
Premier, as you know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has just released the most urgent and frightening scientific report in human history. It's a code red for humanity. The sixth assessment report calls for immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in emissions. The report makes clear that each tonne of carbon pumped out increases the impacts and risks of extreme heat, floods and drought. So every tonne of carbon matters for the world our children will inherit. Premier, as you know, Tasmania's emissions profile is positive primarily because of the carbon stored in our forests across all tenures. In all other sectors of the economy, our emissions are rising. Premier, do you recognise the single most important contribution Tasmania can make to a safe climate is to protect the estimated 4 billion tonnes of carbon stored in our forests? Young people who took part in the Commissioner for Children and Young People's climate change consultation recognise this. Premier, do you accept change is needed?
Honourable Premier.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Leader of the Greens for that question. And I just want to make a couple of points on this, because one of the things that really concerns me, and I note that there's a motion coming on this afternoon, is some of the extreme language that is used that is actually frightening some of our children. That is actually frightening some of our children. I want to make the point, Mr Speaker, because I am very proud of the position that we hold in terms of two key aspects, Mr Speaker. One is in terms of renewable energy. We generate 100% of the renewable energy that we need, and we're on target for 200%, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, if we were a country, that would put us in the top 5 in the world. And Mr Speaker, in terms of our emissions profile, and this is something that I've learned as a result of engaging with the young people through that climate process and also through the Premier's Youth Advisory Council, is that what is not often understood by our young people is how very good we are at the moment, Mr Speaker, in terms of our emissions profile. Mr Speaker, in terms of the 1990 baseline, in 6 out of the last 7 years, we have been at net zero emissions. 6 out of 7 years, Mr Speaker, we have been at net zero. Again, if we were a country, we would again be in the top 5 in the world, Mr Speaker, in terms of our emissions profile. In terms of our emissions profile, Mr Speaker. And again, what the Greens won't talk about is if you look at the other sectors of our economy, Mr Speaker, and we do have some challenges and we will work through them, but if you look at key sectors like agriculture, Mr Speaker, right now, today, even after the exponential growth that we have seen in agriculture since 1990, Mr Speaker, we are below the 1990 baseline for agriculture as a sector. Productivity and output has gone up and emissions have come down in terms of agriculture, Mr Speaker. If you look at the waste sector, Mr Speaker, we're down by nearly a quarter, nearly 26%, or in fact more than a quarter, 26%, Mr Speaker, compared to the 1990 baseline. Now again, these are things that the Greens won't talk about, Mr Speaker. These are the things that the Greens won't talk about. We should be proud of our emissions profile. We should be proud of where we stand in terms of renewable energy, Mr Speaker. They should stop trying to frighten our kids, Mr Speaker. Where they should be educating our kids on the basis that we can lead the country.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. I personally take offence at the accusation.
No way.
Order.
At the accusation we are trying to frighten children.
No
we're
way.
repeating the science, and what we're trying to do is protect children.
Order. It was a general statement. It wasn't directed at any individual, and so it's
We've
not
quoted from the scientific report.
Order.
You'd have to agree. We've got a pretty damn good story to tell. Don't you? We've got a pretty good damn story to tell, Mr Speaker. And what the Greens could do, Mr Speaker, you know, rather than railing against projects like major wind farms. You know, one of the things that this state can do, Mr Speaker, in terms of its renewable energy base, in terms of where we're heading with Marinus, Mr Speaker, where we're heading with Battery of the Nation, what we can do is to help the entire country to transition to renewables, Mr Speaker.
It's buying big batteries.
Mr Speaker,
Order.
Mr Speaker, they could stop standing in the way of us generating more renewable energy and let us help the entire country. You know, Tasmania, Mr Speaker, we could be the tail that wags the dog, quite frankly, Mr Speaker, because we are so far in front of every jurisdiction in this country. And as I've said, Mr Speaker, if you look at the more than 200 countries in this world, in terms of renewable energy, in terms of emissions profile, we'd be in the top 5, Mr Speaker. And that is what the Greens should be talking to our children about, Mr Speaker. They should be helping to educate them, make them feel proud, as I am, as this side of the House is, Mr Speaker, about what we've done. The 100 years, Mr Speaker, of investment into renewables, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the 100 years of investment into renewables, the choices that past governments have had to make, Mr Speaker, which have put us into the position where we are. Mr Speaker, one of the most attractive,
Ms. O'Connor,
one of the
order.
most progressive jurisdictions in the world. That's the conversation that we need to have with our children, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, other states and jurisdictions can learn off us, Mr Speaker, and the Leader of the Greens should stop talking us down, because we are in a very good position.